You guys remember on the 4th day of the war, when that 40-mile-long convoy of military vehicles started going south from Belarus to Kyiv, and that one convoy had more military firepower than the entirety of Ukraine's pre-war military? And I had been probably one of the more optimistic people for Ukraine, seeing that they've made a lot of gains in their military efficiency and their decision-making and their equipment since the first war in 2014. I was like, they'll probably last 6 months to a year. And I was as optimistic as it got. And here I am on the 4th day of the war, and I'm like, well, I was wrong. This is going to be over by the weekend. And then on the 7th day of the war, that convoy stopped because the Russians forgot fuel trucks. And over the next 3 days, soldiers got out of their equipment and walked back to Belarus because they also forgot food. And there was this general flabbergasted feeling across the defense industries of the West as we realized that a lot of the assessments that we had all kind of assumed bedrocked our analysis were just wrong. The Russians don't have an army. They have a mob with guns, and that's something that's very different. And so as we kind of repositioned and reassessed, we realized that if the Russians are successful in Ukraine, when they push up against Poland and Romania and the rest, they will come across NATO forces that are the experts in combined arms warfare, and the Russian forces will be obliterated. On a good day, they might kill one NATO force for every 1,000 that they lose. But that made no one happy, because if there's anything we understand about how the Russians see the world, it's this. And if they can't possibly defeat NATO in a conventional conflict, but they've already paid the price for a major war with none of the benefits, then nukes will come into play the next day.
If Russia loses to Ukraine, they might escalate the conflict by provoking a conventional war against NATO. In that scenario, Russia could unleash nuclear weapons and trigger a global catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. That's the latest prediction from geopolitical expert and strategist Peter Zyyhan. On the 4th day of the war between Russia and Ukraine, a massive 40-mile-long convoy of Russian military vehicles was spotted heading south from Belarus towards Kyiv. The sheer size of this convoy was intimidating, carrying more firepower than Ukraine's entire pre-war military. Even the most optimistic supporters of Ukraine, who believed their improved military efficiency and equipment could help them last at least 6 months, began to lose hope in the country. But then, that massive convoy stopped on the 7th day of the war. Why? Because the Russians forgot to bring fuel trucks. Over the next few days, Russian soldiers were seen abandoning their vehicles and walking back to Belarus. They had also forgotten to bring food. This surprising blunder made the world realize that the Russian army was not as formidable as previously thought. In today's in-depth analysis, geopolitical expert Peter Zyyhan explains why Russia could resort to nuclear weapons if it loses to Ukraine, and discusses other serious global effects that could happen if Russia were to lose. Make sure to stick around to the end of the video, where we will break down Peter's analysis, discuss the geopolitical implications, and what this could mean for global stability. Also guys, only a small percentage of my viewers are subscribed. If you enjoy economics, geopolitics, and history, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Now let's jump in with this analysis with Peter Zyyhan.
And so the decision was made in Washington, in London, in Berlin, in Warsaw, even in Stockholm, in the first month of the war, that we had to prevent that occasion from occurring. And so the Ukrainians can have anything that they can prove that they can operate and maintain. The Germans were very, very specific on the whole maintenance thing, because like a weapon system you use once and then stop, that's not a weapon system, that's a paperweight. Operate and maintain. But they can have it. Everything else is a rounding error. There's a lot of rounding errors, there's a lot of details to work out. But that's the strategic assessment from the very beginning, because we know if we don't do this and the war reaches the NATO border, we will lose Atlanta and Detroit. It's just about the numbers. Now, that has any number of implications, no matter how you look at it. I think it's good to look at the raw material supply issue. This is Central Siberia, in case anyone is looking for a summer home. It's permafrost. Now, you guys don't have a lot of that down here, but the concept is it's so cold year-round that you have a layer somewhere from a centimeter down to 10 feet, 30 feet somewhere, where below that level it never thaws. And in the summer, the top layer melts, and oftentimes you get horizon-spanning swamps like this. These are thermal karst lakes. If you want to produce something mineral-wise in this sort of environment, you wait for it to freeze solid, you run a piece of infrastructure, typically a berm with a pipeline, a road, a rail line, out into the middle, thousands of miles long in some cases. You have your drilling platform, and you drill in the winter when it's all frozen. You can't drill in swamp. And then you ship it back. Now, this is a very expensive environment to work in. And so the Russians have the highest upfront development costs in the world. It's also a very dynamic landscape because, it melts every year. And so let's say you have an aquifer that cracks open. Well, everything slides to the side. Or maybe the aquifer drains down, in which case you get a mother of a sinkhole. Or let's say you have a warmer than normal summer, and so the permafrost starts to melt, and then when it refreezes, water expands, and the land bubbles. These are all really bad for infrastructure. So the Russians have the highest maintenance costs for mineral production in this region in the world as well. Problem for the Russians, their educational system collapsed in 1986. Before the Soviet fall, which means the youngest people in Russia who are worthy of the term engineer, they turned 64 this year. You think you have labor problems? Oh no. So for the last 15 years, the Russians haven't been the ones doing this work. They don't have this labor force for it anymore. It's been BP, it's been Exxon, and especially the Germans and the Dutch. And that all went to zero the day the Russians rolled into Ukraine.
If Russia were to push further and come up against NATO forces in Poland, Romania, or other neighboring countries, they would face a coalition that excels in combined arms warfare. In such a scenario, the Russian forces would likely be decimated, with a potential loss ratio of 1 NATO soldier for every 1,000 Russians. However, this realization is not comforting in even the slightest. Many nations now worry that if Russia couldn't win a conventional war against NATO, they might resort to using nuclear weapons. Recognizing the danger, Western countries, including the US, the UK, Germany, and others, decided that Ukraine needed all the support it could get. The goal was to prevent the conflict from reaching NATO borders. As such, a conflict could result in catastrophic consequences, including the loss of major cities like Atlanta and Detroit. Now, let's get back to Peter Zyyhan as he discusses what might happen next.
I can't tell you when this is all going to stop. Tomorrow, next year, 10 years from now, I just don't know. Too many moving pieces. But we need to prepare for a world where none of this stuff gets out. And that means the world's third largest supplier of oil, the largest supplier of nickel, the second largest supplier of natural gas, lithium, rare earths, you name it. It's all going away. That has implications for lots of folks. Green transition should be at the top of that list. But for purposes of this group, I just want to compare it to what it looks like on the other side of the world. Here's the upper Midwest. Anyone from this map? Okay, so you guys know that the most important place, not just on this map, but in human history, is this city right here. This is Marshalltown, Iowa, where I'm from. Here we have Bismarck, North Dakota. Should you find yourself in Bismarck, you're gonna have to ask yourself the deep, penetrating, soul-searching question, how did I let that happen? And this is not a frat party. This is the Bakken oil shale, and it's lit up because of a problem with transport. Now, oil's a liquid. It conforms to the shape of a container, so you can put it into a rail car or tanker truck, whatever you want. But natural gas is a gas. It disperses. So you have to have a leak-free system to collect it, to transport it, and to use it at the same pace that it comes in, because storage is almost impossible. Now, here in the US, we have the world's largest and most diversified natural gas transport system, but we can't keep up with what is bubbling up out of the oil fields as a byproduct. And we can see it from space, the flaring. So here, only here, natural gas basically sells below market price. And so our natural gas prices consistently for the last 15 years have been a quarter or less the global average. It's a very different world. So if you've got the American system with a more stable labor market and one that will recover, and a more stable capital market and one that will recover, and the need to expand its industrial plant to have it local, the math is all there for a boom of just absolutely epic proportions. Now, what that means is different based on who you are.
So now, here's a breakdown of what we discussed and additional analysis. Peter asserts that if Russia loses to Ukraine, it might escalate the conflict by provoking a conventional war with NATO. NATO, a group of countries committed to mutual defense, could become involved in a larger and more dangerous war if Russia tries to draw them in. Peter warns that this escalation could lead to the use of nuclear weapons by Russia if they feel cornered and defeated, and this would create a global catastrophe of unprecedented proportions. That said, the geopolitical implications of this issue are significant. A conventional war with NATO would heighten global tensions and potentially lead to widespread conflicts involving many countries. This escalation could disrupt global markets, causing shortages of critical resources and economic instability. The impact on global stability would be severe, with increased danger and potential strains in international alliances. Countries might have to realign their positions based on the evolving conflict. And of course, a major war, especially one involving nuclear weapons, could result in a devastating humanitarian crisis that would impact millions of people worldwide. This situation demands close monitoring and international efforts to prevent such a catastrophic scenario. What do you think of these developments? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe for more updates and analysis as we track the most important global issues.